Revelation 7 prophesies that the world is going to go through a tribulation, a 7-year tribulation, according to Daniel. But there's something else called the Great Tribulation. What exactly is the Great Tribulation? I brought an expert in Bible prophecy to help answer that question. Well, folks, I'm so glad to have Bill Salus of Prophecy Depot Ministries joining us. He's the author of Apocalypse Road and Nuclear Showdown in Iran and many other books. And he's an expert on Bible prophecy, especially when it comes to the tribulation time period coming up. Bill, so glad you could join us.
Thanks, Nathan. Great to be back. And this is a very fascinating topic. Fortunately, the church, for pre-trib rapture believers, will be raptured beforehand. But we have loved ones that are going to get left behind, probably that we know in our sphere of influence even today, that need to know about these prophecies of the tribulation.
Absolutely. Revelation 7:14 tells of a great multitude that no one could count from every nation, tribe, people, and language standing before the throne in front of the Lamb who had come out of the Great Tribulation. So we hear in the Bible about this 7-year tribulation, this time of Jacob's trouble, a 7-year time period that is prophesied, or it's also called the 70th week of Daniel. But here we read about martyrs who came out of what's called the Great Tribulation. Bill, maybe you could explain the difference between the tribulation and the Great Tribulation.
Absolutely. The 7-year period is broken into two segments throughout various scriptures. Sometimes it's 3.5 years, sometimes it's 42 months, sometimes it's 1,260 days. Even there's a time, times, and half a times. Time being 2 years, times 1 year, and half a times half a year. So clearly the 7-year period is divided into two segments, the first half and the second half. You read a passage that talked about these saints coming out, tribulation saints coming out of the Great Tribulation. The Greek word is megasolipsis. It shows up 3 times in the New Testament. Jesus talks about the Great Tribulation in Matthew 24. It also talks in the letter to Thyatira in Revelation chapter 2, I think it's 2, about the Great Tribulation. So we have a distinction, and it's great because the events are more powerful and bigger. And each one of the judgments in the tribulation period, and there's 21, you got seal judgments and trumpet judgments, and you got the 7 bowl judgments. Each one of them gets more powerful, it seems like, on the heels of the other, and more damage is done to the planet, and more people are affected by that. Lots of population gets killed, and sadly, lots of things like that happen.
When you get to Matthew 24:22, God says, or Jesus says, "Great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again." So we're talking about the worst time period in human history is the tribulation, but you're saying then the Great Tribulation is the second half is even worse?
It is, and it is just lined with Bible prophecies. You have a whole bunch of them taking place right in the midpoint of the prophecy. And I have a book out called The Final Prophecies, the prophecies in the last 3.5 years of the tribulation. This is the Great Tribulation period we're talking about. And we can go through some of those time permitting. But in that period of time, what happens is the 7th trumpet sounds, and it unleashes the 7 bowl judgments. And we're told in Revelation 15 that the wrath of God is completed in the 7 bowl judgments. So God has reserved the outpouring of his final wrath. Now, some of God's wrath, of course, is coming out through the other judgments, but the final wrath, the most powerful, potent parts, come out in those 7 bowl judgments. And like, for instance, at that time now, the Antichrist will be coming into fruition as the world leader. He will implement the mark of the beast. And that's, of course, no one will buy or sell unless they take a mark upon their right hand or upon their forehead. But the first bowl judgment's reserved for when that happens, puts out loathsome sores throughout all the people who take the mark of the beast. And then the bowl judgments get progressively worse. It ultimately gets to a point where the drinking water is not available to these people, etc. Scorching heat comes, and then outer darkness comes on his throne. I mean, these things get progressively worse to the point where ultimately mankind assembles itself in the war of Armageddon, where they think they can actually defeat God and try to restore some sort of normalcy to the earth with the Antichrist and the kings of the earth and the 10 kings, etc. So this book is covering so many prophecies, Nathan. What happens in the middle? What happens throughout the second 3.5 years? It's really powerful. And frankly, with what we see going on with COVID-19 and the way things are coming together toward a global order and these sort of things, a lot of us are very concerned that we're really deep into the end times. And the good news is Jesus is going to come get his church before these tribulation prophecies happen. But the bad news is, like I said earlier, we do not want even our enemies to go through these things that are about to happen.
Absolutely not. So what is the event then that breaks the 7-year tribulation into 3.5-year pieces?
Well, you mean some of the things in the midpoint, you've got a war in heaven where Satan and a third of his angels fight with Michael the archangel, and they lose and they get cast down to the earth. When he comes down to the earth, he's got an issue because his point man, the Antichrist, has received a mortal head wound and he has to be resurrected. Now, when Satan does this resurrection, which it appears to be a legitimate resurrection, but I write about what the explanations in the book, it says the whole world marvels and follows the Antichrist. Now, this is when he kicks in. The Antichrist kicks in. And meanwhile, you've had a global religion that was going on that gets desolated by 10 kings right at the midpoint. And now he can come over and now declare himself as God. He goes into the Jewish temple. There'll be a third Jewish temple at that time. He will stop the sacrifices and offerings that are taking place. This is another thing happening around the midpoint of the tribulation. He will go in and do the abomination of desolation, and he will exalt himself above all that's called God. Meanwhile, he comes out of the temple, and at some point in the time, he picks up a friend called the false prophet. So now you've got Satan on the scene, the Antichrist, and the false prophet. You've got the unholy trinity. And then the false prophet says, let's make an image to the beast, and anyone who does not worship this beast, this image will be killed. And then he says, those who will worship it, now we're going to give you a mark, the mark of the beast, so that you can buy and sell and be part of our economy, which I believe will be a cashless economy. And I believe those technologies we utilize will probably be like cryptocurrencies and blockchain technologies, Nathan, which are already rapidly advancing in the forum right now.
It seems like in the tribulation time period, the Antichrist during the first 3.5 years is focused on consolidating his empire against the Gentile nations to create. But it seems like after he possesses the Antichrist, going into the second half, that Satan's efforts are focused against the Jewish people. He seems to persecute. We read in the Bible that 2/3 of the Jewish people will be killed. That's almost 9 million in today's numbers. Do you agree that the second half of the tribulation is Satan's wrath primarily focused against utterly trying to destroy the Jews?
When he gets cast down to the earth, it says he knows his time is short. That's in Revelation chapter 12. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth. He has a twofold plan, and they're both aspects get accomplished if he can commit genocide of the Jews. We're told in Zechariah 13:8 that the Antichrist actually kills 2/3 of the Jews in the land. 1/3 becomes a faithful remnant that survives. The reason he's got this twofold plan is, one, if he can kill all the Jews, he can prove that God's a promise breaker, because God promised in Abraham in Genesis 15 and elsewhere that he would have descendants forever and that they would have a land to live on forever. And if you can take away the land and kill all the Jews, you just proved God was a promise breaker. Also, Matthew 24, you read it from it earlier. Matthew 23 rather, at the end of it, Jesus said to the Jewish people, he said that you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. That was a mandate. The Jewish people as a nation, and there'll be a third remnant left that will do this, will say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. They'll need to do this. They'll be in their affliction. The Antichrist will be coming after them, and he will return. Now, if there's no Jews left in the world, there's no Jews to say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So you have a Savior stranded in heaven by his own admission. I will not come until they say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.
Wow. No wonder Jeremiah 30 verse 7 called it the time of Jacob's trouble. It seems that the Bible prophesies that there's going to be great tribulation come on the world, especially to the Jewish people. But the end result is millions, many tribes, tongues, nations of people all out the world will give their lives to Jesus Christ and get saved. And the Jewish people nationally will call out Jesus to be their Messiah. Pray for that day. Keep out looking up. Jesus is coming soon.